Hello and welcome to Norfolk Replies. And tonight something a little bit different. You've been sending in your questions for Norwich South MP Clive Lewis, something that we've imaginatively called Ask Clive. So Clive's got around 90 seconds to answer all of these questions and we will get through as many as possible. Clive, good evening.
Good evening.
All right, we'll start off with a question about Labour's education policy. Something very current this. This is from That Midwife on Twitter. They say, what's Clive's view on VAT being added to school fees? That's private schools fees. We scrimp and save to work 50 plus hours a week each to pay for it. At the moment, we can't afford a 20% increase.
Well, I think the first thing to say is the policy to put VAT on private school fees, to charge VAT on private school fees, is about how do we help the vast majority of children in Norwich and the country. And that's what the policy gets to. Now, I understand there will be people who struggle and scrimp and save to send their children to private school. And that's a choice that they make and you know, that's their call. But I'm looking out for the 93% of children in this city who go to state schools, public schools across the city. And I know that there are thousands of children in this city who go to school hungry. I'm not accepting that, and I don't think many like-minded people in this city want to accept that.
Because the policy is to pay for free school meals.
So the policy is to pay university free school meals. And look, I've just come from a meeting of parents who are at a school from one of the most socially deprived parts of our city. We know in this city, it's the second worst city where if you're born poor, you're most likely to die poor in this country. And I want to make sure that no child in this city goes to school hungry, because we know the evidence shows that if you go to school hungry, if you don't have nutrition, if you don't have the food at lunchtime, your concentration dips, you fall behind in education. So this is about making sure that we lift up all of our children, not just the 7%, but the 93% as well. And it's not about taking from one to give to the other, although that technically is what's happening. But let's not forget that the 7% of people who send their children to private school, the majority of them are some of the wealthiest people in the country. And we live in one of the most unequal societies in Western Europe. So I think this is fair, and I think it's something most people, it's looking at, and it's trying to work out what's in the best interest of the vast majority of children in this city.
Well, Clive, we can move on. Next question is about adult social care in Norfolk. This was from C. Parr via email. Is adult social care in Norfolk in a real crisis, and what could be done to make it better?
I think you only have to go and talk to people who have elderly parents or relations in the elderly care system to understand what is happening and the crisis that it is actually in. There have been 158, we reckon, I think the STPs, these social transformation plans, are saying that there will be 158 million shortfall by 2020 or just before in the social care budget in Norfolk County Council and in the country, in Norfolk and Waveney. And I think you begin to understand just how much of a problem there is. Now, what I think needs to happen, there's two things that need to happen. The first thing is that Conservatives across our county need to step up, because you've got a Conservative county council and a Conservative government, and they need to kind of get out of the shadows and stand up to Theresa May and say our social care system is in crisis. We live in a county where we have an ageing population. That means there's extra pressure on adult social care. I have people coming into me all the time talking about the care or the lack of care that their parents and family and relations are receiving. That's not the way it should be. So we want to see that change, and there's two ways. First of all, we need to stand up. The local Tories in this county need to stand up with people like me and others who are campaigning for money. You can't always do more with less. It's simply not possible. But the other thing is as well, we need to make sure that we reverse the £70 billion of tax cuts that George Osborne and now Philip Hammond are giving away to large corporations and banks in the reduction in corporation tax and other tax giveaways. And also ensure that we can have an integrated health and social care system so that we can better maximise the resources that we put into there. So there are three things we can do, but yes, there is a crisis, and this one is owned by the Conservatives, lock, stock and barrel.
OK, we'll move on. Thank you very much indeed. We'll move on to Jeremy Corbyn, your party leader. Are you 100% supporting the party's democratically elected leader? That comes from Fiona Lynch-Williams via Facebook.
Yes, 100% I'm backing the democratically elected leader of our party. But look, I think Jeremy and the leadership would understand that we as a party have to do better. But that's not just the responsibility of the leadership. That's the responsibility of every single MP in Parliament, because I think most people will understand that it's not just about how well Jeremy or John or a handful of other people in the shadow cabinet are doing. As a collective entity, we've had a very hard 2 years, and if we actually want to stand up and represent the people we came into politics to represent, that means everyone in our party getting behind, putting their shoulder to the wheel and pushing. Because at the moment, it's
do better. What does do better look like?
Do better means, first of all, stop the public arguments. I think that's the first thing, and the sniping and the backbiting, because people don't like divided parties. And we're going through one of the most, I think, traumatic periods in recent political history with Brexit and what's happening internationally on the international scene with Donald Trump, with Syria and so on. And people need an opposition that can oppose. Now, people say it's all Jeremy Corbyn's fault. That's rubbish. If you look at the history of the Labour Party and where we've been and how we've got to where we are, our problems aren't just about Jeremy Corbyn. They go far deeper and further back than just the last 2 years. So I think it's about stepping up, accepting what all of our roles collectively have been in this, and actually moving forward and getting behind the leader, because this is the key thing. Jeremy Corbyn isn't going anywhere. So we've got an option then. What are you going to do? How are you going to fight the next election? Are you going to fight the House divided, or are you going to stand together and actually take on this Conservative government, which so many people want to see because they're so unhappy with how they're doing things?
That sounds like emphatic support to me. Next question. Brexit was something you mentioned just a moment ago. This question was via Facebook from Adam Gifford. Why has Jeremy Corbyn issued a 3-line whip on supporting the government's Brexit bill? As Britain is a parliamentary democracy, the result of the referendum was not legally binding.
No, it wasn't legally binding, nor was the referendum to go into the EC as it was then. That wasn't legally binding either. But you've got two democratic principles here. You've got the democratic principle of a referendum, which, I understand, as many people do, it was a referendum that was flawed. When David Cameron set it up, it was done without a minimum threshold. These are kind of radical constitutional changes that could be taking place in the next few years, couple of years. And there was no minimum threshold, no 2/3 turnout or 2/3 majority, for example. And we didn't allow 16 and 17-year-olds to vote, and the list goes on. But the reality is we accepted the terms of that debate, we voted in that referendum, and that's where we are. And we've now got to make it work. But this is, I think, where people get angry with Jeremy Corbyn, get angry with the Labour Party, is they feel that he has taken one particular side. I think the issue now is I'm personally resigned from the shadow cabinet, because although I expected and accepted that the Article 50 needed to be triggered, I didn't want it triggered on the terms of a hard Brexit and a Conservative Brexit, which is what we've got. And I think Parliament failed in that sense to hold the government to account, because now we've been told you'll get a deal and you'll like it or lump it, and it's not a meaningful vote. That's not acceptable, because the whole point about Brexit was about giving sovereignty back to Parliament, the People's Parliament. And Theresa May is taking that power back and handing it to the executive, her cabinet and her ministers and herself. That is unacceptable. So look, I understand some people have been angry about that, but there's a whole battle ahead of us now to ensure that the best possible deal, the closest possible relationship to Europe, I'd like to stay in the single market, or the customs union at least, takes place. And I think that's still possible.
OK, we'll move on to another question now. This is about the state of the Labour Party. Nearly 20 points behind in the opinion polls. Is the Labour Party well and truly finished under Corbyn? That's from ex-Lab, now UKIP on EDP24. I think their political stance is fairly obvious there, but is the party finished under Corbyn, looking at those polls?
No, look, the demise of the Labour Party has been touted by lots of people over many years and many times, and I'm confident in the future of the Labour Party. But that's not complacency. The Labour Party has to change what it's doing, what it's saying, and how it's behaving. We touched on earlier about the way that the party inside Parliament behaves and how we act. That has to change. But so too does Labour's vision of what our society will look like, our economy will look like, regaining people's trust on the economy, regaining people's trust that we actually have a vision that is going to work for the families and people across our city here in Norwich and the country. Now, we're living through quite tumultuous times politically. But what that means is that Labour has to be able to say to people, look them in the eye and say that actually we not only have your family's interests at heart and can better relate to them in ways that the Conservative Party never can, never will do, but we also have the competence to be able to deliver a manifesto for real change in our country, real change in our society, real change in our economy, so that it works for the many and not just a few. And I don't just mean about turning taps on and giving money to people. I mean giving power back to people, back to regions, back to communities, back to individuals. That's what it's about, and that's where Labour will win, when it articulates that manifesto, articulates that vision for the future that people understand, can buy into, and want to be a part of. It's about socialism in the 21st century. That's what I called it.
Well, Clive, we got through as many as we possibly could. Thank you very much indeed for answering all of those, and thank you everyone for getting your questions in as well. That was Ask Clive on Norfolk Replies. We got through as many questions as we possibly could. Thank you very much to Clive Lewis for coming in and joining us, and thank you for your questions too. Have a very good night.